My name is Marnie Ritchie, and I'm very excited to get the chance to present this video for the Heavy Childhoods Conference, and I'm excited to collaborate with everyone. I am going to be presenting a paper called Red Litotes, Color as a Resource to Communicate Childhood Pain in Poetry. And this is based off a critical paper for my MFA in creative writing in poetry. And I analyzed 4 books that all use the color red. And I think there's a lot that red can teach us about childhood and heavy childhoods. Color is so important to literature and poetic literature. For the letter C, he chooses color, and he writes, "How does color get onto the page and into the reader's internal eye? Certainly not by naming it. It doesn't do much to just say the red door. Not enough there for the senses to work on. Not enough specificity in the naming and not enough engagement of the other senses. As soon as I add another qualifier, a shadow of dimension appears, the scraped red door. Go a little further and physicality begins to materialize, the rough, scraped red door." But what's interesting is that in the works that I'm going to be analyzing, red is not given a lot of description. It's pretty much on its own as the only modifier, red. And in these poems, which I was reading for my MFA program, I noticed that the red is really understated. And what began to emerge is that through the understatement of the red began to stand in for childhood pain. And in these poems, red is the suffusive, unavoidable, chronic pain of not knowing how to make oneself loved, a state that's inherent to childhood and continually staged in adulthood. So I believe the second definition is kind of what we're after here. The Poetry Foundation defines lightity as deliberate understatement for effect. And I think the major effect of the understatement is irony, because though the red is unadorned, the poem's diction, syntax, and enjambment make the red pulse with intensity. And though the violence that the red references often is traumatic, the poems are really anti-sentimental about that violence. And though the tone and the simpleness of the red can be childlike, there are a lot of lessons about adulthood and the future and becoming and finding home that are quite mature. I want to delve into what I trace as 5 formal uses of red. First, paratactic. I see parataxis as differing lines in poems where the meaning is not clearly following, maybe in a sentence from one line to the next, but each line is given equivalence. Hypotaxis suggests hierarchies of meaning, right? Subject, object, verb, and kind of maybe a sentence snaking down the page. Bergrun says is one long poem, and it's composed through erasure of Bram Stoker's Dracula. And she chose Dracula because she felt strong emotions about how the book made femininity the monster, and so she wanted to disembowel the book and reconstitute it. This is also a book about her own gender transition, where they were attempting to define their own womanhood, and the poems traveled alongside them during that. So I chose a poem that's very strongly connected to childhood. Chapter 3. Let me begin with observation. My concern is with agency. I was satisfied with my body. My desire is my own. My smile, my own. I unsealed the seriousness of sound. Freedom melted in the weather-worn abyss. Some weird effect of shadow could allow an opportunity to resist. I took pleasure in disobeying. I determined not to compose myself. I suppose I was not unchanged. I thought I felt desire kiss me with red lips. Never could I be a girl on her knees. I was a storm of a woman, transformed with red light, having an impervious voice forward into the dimness. You see with the lines red lips, they have a parallelism with red light, but it's in parataxis. The final 4 stanzas are hypotaxis, so you kind of get that transformation, the energy of that transformation. And red here seems to be a source of feminized vitality, but for a difficult transition. I'll skip over the juxtapositional one, but just know that when you juxtapose 2 colors, Doty says that can magnify and change the feeling of each color, and poets use that as a technique all the time. The example is from Berggren's book, The End of It, which contrasts white and red. Childlike. And for this, I looked at Banu Koppel's book Incubation, which follows the travels of a cyborg monster human hybrid named Lalu. And Lalu's nickname or namesake is an individual who they actually found within the Anomalies and Curiosities of Medicine, a real encyclopedic book. And it's a person whose twin didn't detach from the bottom half. And so it's about kind of a person who feels monstrous as a migrant child who's traveling throughout the US. Lalu's name comes from red, so Lalu means red because Lal means red. So Lalu means the red one. And Koppel links the name to childhood before menstruation because it is a Punjabi nickname given to children and abandoned in most cases when the child is grown, sprouting hair and dripping blood all over the white 1970s shag carpeting. And incubation is the story of how the child got their name. They said, I turned red over the course of my journeys. To put it another way, I changed from one kind of girl to another as a result of my experiences. And this book is a very interesting one because it includes a glossary that only runs A through L, and it details how Lalu follows imperatives to stop at certain locations, leading to Beatrice, Nebraska. And the glossary is prose, which de-emphasizes line breaks and emphasizes other craft elements, and one of them is anaphora, or the repetition of the phrase L is for. And there's this really childlike wordplay that associates red, love, blood, and girlhood with one another. For instance, L is for Lalu, darkness in a dress. L is for Lalu, kicking off her shoes. L is for love, which is blood. So we see a childlike use of color to associate red with blood, with girlhood, with transformation. We have a focal color. For this, I looked at Mother by M.S. Red Cherries, and it's a semi-autobiographical story. Red Cherries says it's about a child who gets adopted out and tries to restore their connection to their home and their birth family. The poem I focused on is Red is the Only Color I See, which reads, Blood men can do better if I can be as Indian as you let me be. If you let me braid my hair, it does not mean I know how to braid my hair. America takes and peels away all we know we are, felt feeling abundance in some other when, in the big open when. And red becomes the focal color because it is, within the title, it's the primary first word, and it almost becomes a key for unlocking everything else. You obviously have blood associations within this, but you also have that felt feeling abundance in capital letters as the only capital thing, and that brings an association with red. Red continues the Red Movement's use of red or red as a metonymic device for all Native Americans or anything Native, as in the lines, my heart is red, or red tilts home, or God is red, and red skin. Mother connects red to the American Indian movement through multiple generations. So you can see that it's a story about the poem, Red is the Only Color I See, is one of also violence, but also pride. And within Mother, there's mention of Custer Died for Your Sins by Vine Deloria Jr., which recounts a story in which a white American soldier fighting with Custer defected, painted himself in mud, and when found by Native fighters said, better red than dead. And the title of Deloria Jr.'s book comes from a bumper sticker slogan circulated in the 1960s, stating Custer was the blood sacrifice for the United States, breaking the Sioux Treaty. You can see a lot with red is the only color I see in blood, and this feeling of, within the poem, of painful disembodiment from her childhood because of colonialism, and then a kind of re-embodiment with red. In poetry, when it comes to color, you're always going to have certain cliches, like red, red, rose. And so the fifth and final one I want to talk about is a cliche image. And for this, I look at Lynn Melnick's book, Landscape with Sex and Violence, which associates gendered violence with where it took place. This is a poem about rape culture and about a narrator's experiences of child molestation. And red lipstick is a device that's used within this to communicate intensity. but with kind of a nonchalance that survivors must adorn to survive within landscapes. So for this, I looked at You Think It's Tragic, but no, maybe not. In a life that's at least half over, if I thought from the beginning that few were looking out for me, the horizon proves me right. Only contrails in the sky. What if with no shadows I'm sneaking away? What if I'm clothed? I'm on flight or I don't. I left for a spell. I left for a spell and was cuffed and gagged and let go. I've never told anyone that. A man in a clinic suggested I stop keeping secrets, so I'll share with you my most recent fat lip. How the new red I bought covers it pretty good. How it hurts when you kiss me and I don't dare look up. And there's no end to this. Chemtrails, the world destroying itself. So Dodie's lesson about language is really important here because she doesn't say the shade of the new red. You know, the red door is not the rough scraped red door. The new red is not a rouge, right? And so the reader retains a kind of privacy and nonchalance. The image is kind of boundaried. In other words, the narrator faces a you and discloses to a you about the abuse that's not the reader. Lasky asks us to think about what would this poem be without this color? And so, what would this poem be without this red lipstick, which is a cliche image of femininity and maturation from girlhood to womanhood? Dorothea Lasky says, if we think of the old tired line, roses are red, or tired question mark line, roses are red, we can see how far colors and poems have taken us already. To assert roses are red is a pretty bombastic assertion. So she asks us to always think about what is the image that I'm asserting and how is that going to be perceived by a reader. If you were to think about how to take this into your own writing, or if you were to try to write a poem, you don't have to choose red, but you could think about a color memory from childhood. And if you do not want to think about childhood, you can think about a time maybe you felt childlike and think about, is there one color coming through that's a prominent color to you? And I would encourage you to write a poem that uses that color. Try to use that color unadorned. So don't add texture to it like Dodie does. Just use it in a very understated way through the litotes, right? An understatement for magnified effect. And I would suggest maybe trying out one of the 5 formal uses discussed, paratactic, juxtapositional, childlike, focal, or cliche. Reference point that I have in this epilogue for red is the Hitchcock movie Marnie, which is about the pain of a woman named Marnie Edgar, or Margaret Marnie Edgar, played by Tippi Hedren, who cannot receive love from her mother, Bernice Edgar, played by Louise Lantham. And really the mystery of the film, what people watch for, is why Marnie reacts to the color red, and it functions as the film's central enigma. Film scholar John Belton explains that viewers are to interpret that she reacts to the red, primarily not to the object, but to the color. And I'll insert a little scene here where you can see the character's reaction.
Who is it, Jessie?
Hello, Mama.
Well, I just want Marnie. You're at the very limit. I can't take you the way you jump around all over the place like you do. Boston, Massachusetts, Elizabeth, New Jersey.
I brought you some chrysanthemums.
Gladiolas are brand fresh. Miss Cotton brought them to me only last night.
I never could stand gladiolas. I'll get rid of these.
Red in Marnie, John Belton says, is really a complex bundle of fears and desires that obsess Marnie and that constitute the fabric of her dream work. This bundle includes unreciprocated love for her mother, Oedipal jealousy, a profound sense of guilt, fear of male sexuality, fear of death, and emotional and psychological paralysis, not to mention a child's more normal fears. So if you haven't seen the movie, I won't spoil it, but it's a really interesting artifact that uses red throughout. Thank you so much. While we couldn't delve into each poem in super depth, I highly recommend those books. And I also just recommend thinking so much more about color and its connection to childhood.